And I am glad to welcome you to our Sunday service this morning here at the UU Church of Columbia. We are a congregation striving to embody courageous love, radical welcome, and deep connection. And we are so glad you are here, bringing all that you are and all that you love and your deepest commitments to a more just world for all. Welcome. We are glad to be offering a live stream of our service, and we would like to extend an additional welcome to those of you joining online. Hello to those online. In-person church, can we get a loud good morning for our online attendees? Good morning! Online folks, we know that we will be learning and improvising as we go along, so please do email Reverend Molly at minister@uucomo.org. So that's minister@uucomo.org with any feedback about the online experience. We strive to make our worship accessible, and those of you at home or using screen readers in person can find an accessible order of service at our homepage, uucomo.org, so uucomo.org. For those of you with us in person, we invite you to attend carefully to the safety of all by leaving plenty of space, wearing your masks, and ensuring you are greeting one another in a way that is comfortable to both parties. We will not be singing hymns together as an entire congregation quite yet, though humming is allowed. We'd like particularly to welcome any visitors among us this morning and invite you to find our guest book at the service, after the service, in the entry if you have not already done so, or in the chat if you're with us online. We'd love to stay in touch with you about our goings on. Children and babies are always welcome in the worship, and we also have a lively children's religious education program that is still taking place outdoors as our children continue to gain access to COVID vaccinations. An usher can direct you to the correct space for your children's classes, and there's also nursery care for babies and toddlers indoors in the lower level. All nursery caregivers and RE teachers are masked and vaccinated. If you have a joy or a sorrow you'd like spoken aloud during the service, you can write them on a yellow slip and place them on the table to my left, your right, trying to translate that, to be included in our time of prayer. Or if you're online, please include your joys and sorrows in the chat now so that they can be relayed to us for the time of the prayer. Now let us take a moment to settle in, join our hearts, and create this beloved space together with the help of our musicians.
Multiple layers here, excuse me. The title of our service today, Inclusion as a Spiritual Practice, reminded me of the powerful final scene in the 1984 movie, Places in the Heart. The film takes place in 1935 Texas, and illustrates both Jim Crow racism and ableism toward the blind boarder living in the protagonist widow's home following the accidental shooting death of her husband. She is struggling to keep her small farm to support her 2 young children, knowing nothing about farming or business. The hero of the story is played by Danny Glover, a Black man with no options for work, who is skilled not only in growing cotton, but more importantly, navigating the outside world. Together, this unlikely group brings in the first bale of cotton that provides enough money to pay wages, the mortgage before the KKK comes to brutalize Danny Glover for outperforming white farmers, forcing him to move on. In the final scene, the camera pans the small town church during a Sunday service. At first, it appears to be happening in real time in the film, with close-ups of the widow, her 2 children, and the blind boarder. But then, as the camera pulls back, we see Danny Glover, face free of injuries from his brutal beating. Then we see the widow's husband sitting next to her, and next to him, the young Black man who accidentally shot the husband, resulting in his own brutal death from a white mob. I continue to be profoundly moved by the sacredness of that space, which existed only in the heart. The decision of this church to change its end statements to include disability justice and the outpouring of generosity to raise the funds needed to make our accessibility campaign successful touches me more than words can say. For me, accessibility is the sine qua non of truly sacred space. So today, as the UU Accessibility Campaign draws to a close, let us celebrate this success in community. May the gifts of this campaign consecrate our sacred space and move us toward true inclusion. During this service, please open the sacred places in your hearts to listen deeply to people with disabilities in their own words through poetry, readings, and music. People are not defined by their disabilities, but like everyone, by relationships, interests, and the personal sorrows and moments of joy we all experience. Please meditate on their words about disability, that we might learn how to make inclusion part of our spiritual practice as UUs embracing truly radical welcome.
In the spirit of inclusive community, we now light our chalice to feel its warmth and mark this space as one of worship and reflection. As I light the chalice, please join me in the words of affirmation printed in our order of service. Love is the spirit of this church,
and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
And now we will hear 3 readings presented by the Disability Justice and Inclusion worship team.
The following is an excerpt from an introduction to hashtag Dear World Live, Disability Justice Barriers by Maysoon Zayed, an Arab-American comedian, actress, and disability advocate with cerebral palsy. There are no groups that are free of disability. There's not an age that doesn't have disabled people, or a race with no disabled people, or a gender with no disabled people, or an orientation that doesn't include in it disabled people. Therefore, disability rights are human rights. 50% of people killed by police in the United States are disabled, and disabled women are 3 times as likely to be assaulted in their lifetime. Disability justice is equality for all.
The following poem is entitled Disabled Country by late disabled artist Neil Marcus. If there was a country called disabled, I would be from there. I live disabled culture, eat disabled food, make disabled love, cry disabled tears, climb disabled mountains, and tell disabled stories. If there was a country called disabled, I would say she has immigrants that come to her from as far back as time remembers. If there was a country called disabled, then I am one of its citizens. I came there at age 8. I tried to leave, was encouraged by doctors to leave. I tried to surgically remove myself from disabled country, but found myself, in the end, staying and living there. If there was a country called disabled, I would always have to remind myself that I came from there. I often want to forget. I would have to remember to remember. In my life's journey, I am making myself at home in my country.
Following is a quote by Adrienne Rich, a queer disabled poet. The problem, unstated until now, is how to live in a damaged body in a world where pain is meant to be gagged, uncured, ungrieved over. The problem is to connect, without hysteria, the pain of anyone's body with the pain of the world's body.
Now, as a video from Galen Lee plays, I invite you to come into our weekly ritual of stones and water. You are welcome to come forward and take a stone, representing any of the hopes and fears that you bring with you this morning, and drop the stone in the water, which represents the embrace of our community. Those of you who wish to have your joy or sorrow spoken aloud may write it on a yellow slip at the side table and put it in the basket. Now please come forward as you are willing or able.
pushing up through the dirt just like a seed, but you're never quite a flower. You feel more just like a weed. Driving through, you wanna know where you are going, but the windshield's always dirty, and you never get to see what makes you think that you'll ever get there. What makes you think you deserve to know? Who are you really? Are you so important? Take a look around and watch the world unfold. Watch the world unfold. Watch the world unfold. Watch the world unfold. Need advice, you have no clue what you're doing. Moral compass it is spinning, an identity unhinged. Where to turn, there's so many opinions, and they're all a little different, and the outlook's getting dim. What makes you think that you'll ever get there? What makes you think you deserve to know? Who are you really? Are you so important? Take a look around and watch the world unfold. Watch the world unfold. Watch the world unfold. Watch the world unfold. Pushing up through the dirt just like a seed, but you're never quite a flower. You feel more just like a weed.
As we join in sharing the joys, sorrows, and prayers of the community, I invite you to take a moment of silence to prepare your hearts to hold one another tenderly. Gina and Steve Scott share joy, looking forward to celebrating their 26th wedding anniversary on December 16th. Val asks for prayer for safe travels to her husband flying to Honduras right now. Aaron shares, I'm starting to discover what family can really mean in the grand scheme of life. Pam shares joy for the opportunity to hear Hans Bridger Harith's music. Work by Hans will be performed by the Columbia Chamber Choir on Tuesday, December 14th at 6 p.m. at the Missouri State Historical Society, part of the celebration of 200 years of Missouri music, art, and culture. And we also have joy shared for the life-saving work of Room at the Inn, the winter shelter. Welcome to our unhoused neighbors who will shelter in our sanctuary beginning this evening. Prayers for the well-being of all without shelter in our community. And now I'll share the following prayer, which is written by Bonnie Vegiard. Spirit of love, we pray for all your people, for people who are blind and cannot see, and for those who can see but are blind to people around them. Spirit, in your mercy, help us touch each other, for people who move slowly because of accident, illness, or disability, and for those who move too fast to be aware of the world in which they live. Spirit, in your mercy, help us work together, for people who are deaf and cannot hear, and for those who can hear but ignore the cries of others. Spirit, in your mercy, help us respond to each other, for people who learn slowly, for people who learn in different ways, and for people who learn quickly and easily, but often choose ignorance. Spirit, in your mercy, help us grow in your wisdom, for people who have chronic illnesses for which there is no known cure or relief, and for people who live in unholy fear of developing chronic illness. Spirit, in your mercy, help us and heal us. We now conclude this time of prayer together with another song of reflection by Galen Lee.
Can you see me way in the back here? I've been waiting in line. It's been a long time, can't get no service. Still I am hoping for a sign that one day things will change and we can finally take our place. That history won't forget us or try to minimize our pain, and so I wait. And so I wait. Did you know that when I get angry, I breathe fire? I could burn this place down. You may not realize all of the small ways I am not welcome, but just take a look around. So everybody knows that you need a place to go, and living isn't easy if you incinerate your home, and so I stay. And so I stay. I may seem angry, so please forgive me, but I am still not free in this society. How long must we keep fighting for our right to be living? Wrongs overdue for righting. We're a bit too forgiving. So if you hear them make claims of progress, take a good look and see who isn't there. We need a seat now at the table, so please invite us, or don't pretend to care.
The following is an excerpt from a keynote given by Mia Mingus, a queer, disabled Asian American activist at the Disability Intersectionality Conference in 2018. I think of this as a kind of access, liberatory access, that is, because it is not enough to just make sure we can get into the room, or that the conversation is translated, or that we can access the materials. And it is not enough for us to simply get to share what is important to us. Though I know at many times we don't even get to share that. If no one knows how to hold what we are sharing, if no one knows how to fully understand and engage with what we are sharing, how many times have we been in rooms and shared things only to be met with backlash, avoidance, or blank faces and awkward silence? Because people have not done their own work to educate themselves to be able to meet us. Whether it is in white spaces, abled spaces, hearing spaces, neurotypical spaces, how many times has the conversation continued on as if we never shared at all? I don't just want technical and logistical access. I don't just want inclusion. I want liberatory access and access intimacy. I want us to not only be able to be a part of spaces, but for us to be able to fully engage in spaces. I don't just want us to get a seat at someone else's table. I want us to be able to build something more magnificent than a table. Together with our accomplices, I want us to be able to be understood and to be able to take part in principled struggle together, to be able to be human together, not just placated or politely listened to. When I say liberatory access, I mean access that is more than simply having a ramp, or being sent free or provided captions. Access for the sake of access or inclusion is not necessarily liberatory, but access done in the service of love, justice, connection, and community is liberatory and has the power to transform. I want us to think beyond just knowing the right things to say and be able to truly engage. I want us to not only make sure things are accessible, but also work to transform the conditions that created that inaccessibility in the first place. To not only meet the immediate needs of access, whether that is access to spaces or access to education and resources, or access to dignity and agency, but also work to make sure that the inaccessibility doesn't happen again.
When she passed away, please don't forget to pray. There'll be hard times. Oh, hard times. Lord, who knows better than me? Well, I soon found out, oh, just what you meant when I had to pawn my clothes, ooh, just to pay the rent. There gonna be hard times, oh, hard times. Lord, who knows better than me? I had a woman, oh, she was always around. But when I lost my money, she put me down. Ooh, there are hard times, Lord, there's hard times. Well, who knows better than me? Well, Lord, 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 one of these days, there's gonna be no sorrow when I pass away.
When I thought about what inclusion means to me, a lot came to mind. And I began thinking about my time as an undergrad. When I went blind my senior year at MU, I had to take 6 incompletes. These courses were to be finished after I learned how to use a computer again and function as a blind person, now without sight. One of these courses was film and religion. Rather than forcing me to listen to undescribed films and write papers on them based upon the parts I could hear, Dr. Cohen allowed me to write a paper on a topic much broader in some ways, but quite restricted in others. I wrote about the ways in which a lack of audio description, an account of what can be seen with the eyes in film and other media, excludes persons with vision loss, causing not just inequity, but a lack of means to connection with their sighted peers as well. 13 years after writing this, I have grown used to the feelings of isolation that this exclusion and disconnection causes. However, when acts of intentional accessibility include me in an experience with others, I now feel a sense of love and connection that's even greater. I feel welcome. Diversity Officer Rachel Olivero said, "Inclusion is not bringing people into what already exists. It is making a new space, a better space for everyone. This new space allows for a greater diversity of people, of different backgrounds, perspectives, and abilities. This space allows us to connect more with each other, to share experiences, and to better share thoughts and ideas." One Sunday morning during COVID, sitting in my apartment, sipping coffee, wearing my PJs, and petting my seeing eye dog, I was alone, but began feeling much less lonely and more a part of my church community than ever. When I first heard our church provide descriptions of on-screen images and individuals over a Zoom service, my eyes, not being used for anything else, filled with tears. I finally got to know what my fellow UUs were seeing and experiencing, and I was able to more fully share in the service with others. I felt like I belonged at the table, but more importantly, I felt included.
Now is the time in our service where we offer gifts and donations to support the work of this church. I'm skipping 2/3. I was so moved. I'm like, that's what needed to be said. We heard it. But there's more to be said. So thank you. Thank you for hooking me off.
What inclusion means to me. So when I think about disability inclusion, I like to think about the other work we've done around other stigmatized groups. And the main piece that springs to my mind is working on our discomfort. If we feel uncomfortable discussing racism or being around other given populations, say queer folk or the unhoused, then we have work to do. This includes owning it as our own problem and working on our discomfort. When I find people that struggle with depression as I do, I often think, oh, these are my people, they get it. If I share that I'm struggling with depression, they're not going to ask me why, what happened? What do you mean, what happened? No, because they have the bumper sticker or the t-shirt that reads, depression happens. After sharing something authentic and painful, they're not going to turn around and apologize. For what? You're apologizing for being human and vulnerable? It's actually a relief. And they most certainly won't say, oh, you need to be less sensitive. Oh, right. Why didn't I think of that option? I wish I could say I was exempt from ableist attitudes and never experienced discomfort around differently abled folks. But like you, I've grown up in an ableist society. I also need to check myself if I am uncomfortable around neurodiverse people. And feeling uncomfortable in and of itself, while not desirable, it's not unethical to experience. It's what we do with that feeling. Do we write someone off because we feel uncomfortable around them? Do we turn around and justify our dismissal saying, oh, that person just makes me feel uncomfortable? I'm not saying you and I always have to put ourselves into uncomfortable interactions. But I want us to think about why we might be uncomfortable and how we respond in a manner consistent with our first UU principle.
As a clinical psychologist working with people with disabilities for over 30 years, I have had the privilege of hearing directly from people with mobility impairments as well as sensory impairments about what it feels like not having access to spaces the rest of us take for granted. I consider myself an ally. Until joining UU in 2015, I spent my adult life in secular public spaces, most of which had become physically accessible because of the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act. Disability rights activists fought so hard to pass the ADA and its precursors throughout the 1980s, from a movement built in the 1970s, which few people are aware of today, despite its being modeled after the 1960s civil rights movement. When I joined UU, I realized I was in the inaccessible spaces in the real world that my patients and friends talked about. My comfort came from the fact that UUs before me had thought to build an elevator shaft. It felt like a promise consistent with our faith of radical welcome. Today, let us celebrate the phenomenal success with deepest gratitude to all who have given so generously as our accessibility campaign concludes. UUs are seekers of truth, which includes perspectives other than our own. The wonderful thing about seeking the truth of those usually othered in our society is that the process is lifelong and never finished. In preparation for this service, I learned that world-renowned violinist Itzhak Perlman had polio as a child, which requires him to walk with crutches and use a scooter for distance. Many of you may already be aware of this, but I was not until doing research for this service. Today, we have shared stories, usually unshared, in a majority culture that typically looks away. This past August, Reverend Molly reminded us that hope is a choice that we create together. The collective action we chose together to make our sacred space accessible is the embodiment of faith realized. As we go forth, I would like to remind you of the ideas of Brian Stevenson, one of the great civil rights attorneys of our time and author of Just Mercy. In a talk I attended but have no reference for, he offered several guiding principles for anti-racism work, which also apply to anti-ableism work. The first was maintain hope. The second was get proximate. The third was change the narrative. There was a fourth directive, which I can't recall, but I'm going to substitute 3 more based on my observations over many years. Number 1, don't let your fear of making mistakes keep you from interacting with disabled people. Number 2, do not be bound by our majority culture's fragility, in the words of anti-racism writer Robin DiAngelo. Number 3, when people with disabilities or people of color or any other marginalized group have the energy and courage to give you feedback on how your language or behavior impacted them, say, thank you for the feedback, return to the conversation, and stay in relationship. Let us close with our benediction, happy in the knowledge that should Itzhak Perlman come to our church, he can use the elevator to get to our basement, and Stevie Wonder can find his own way to the restroom. Thank you.
Thank you. Now is the time in our service where we offer our gifts and donations to support the work of this church. This morning we have a Faith to Action collection, and it's going to support the Rising to the Moment accessibility campaign, which, as we were talking about, is hopefully concluding today if we can, or at least reaching the goal today. So please consider making a donation as you are able to help UUCC attain both literal and metaphorical higher ground in meeting our fundraising goal of the accessibility campaign. Your support will make our church more radically welcoming by improving accessibility and inclusivity for all who enter our doors. We would also, by the way, like to thank a generous anonymous donor who's agreed to match up to $250 of this morning's donations to Faith to Action. So please give by visiting the website, or you can text the number that is in the order of service. You can text the amount that you want to donate to that number, and if you add the tag F2A, that will make sure it goes to the accessibility campaign. As we gratefully receive this morning's offering, the Miller brothers, again, are going to share an offering of music.
Thank you. People keep on learning. Flowers keep on warning. World keep on turning. 'Cause it won't be too long. Powers they keep on lying. People, they keep on dying. World, keep on turning. 'Cause it won't be too long. So much glad that you let me again. I'm so glad that we could girl again. I don't know what I do without a friend. I just keep on trying, keep on reaching higher ground.
we dedicate ourselves and our offerings to the mission of this congregation, to nourish courageous love and deep connection, to create radical welcome, and to help heal our world. We want to give special thanks to Lionel and Michael Miller from Band of Brothers for their wonderful music.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Our closing words are by Wayne Arneson. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard. The stakes are very high, and the path is never clear. Take courage, for deep down there's another truth. You are not alone. You're now invited to speak or hum the tune of our benediction.